So, hello everyone. I am Kim Hart. I am the city's correspondent for AXIOS in Washington, D.C. I, about 2 months ago, launched a newsletter on cities, particularly focusing on technological and demographic changes that are shaping cities, mostly in the U.S. My background is in technology and telecom policy, so that's kind of my starting point for looking at the economic development landscape for cities and how they're evolving to better serve their citizens' needs, as well as become more sustainable, more efficient, and all the things that we've been talking about here today at this conference so far. So we've heard a lot about what it means to be a smart city, what the differences are between big, small, medium-sized cities, and what the priorities of those communities are. We just obviously heard about the infrastructure piece of it, and this is kind of bridging the two in some ways, which is talking about the key piece of infrastructure that everyone mentions when we talk about smart cities and how do we get from where we are to where we want to go, and that is 5G, and how that next generation of connectivity is going to power everything from autonomous vehicles to sensors to street lights and everything in between. So I'll quickly introduce our panelists and then we'll go from there. Next to me, we have Steve LeFrancois, a CTO of Enterprise Solutions for the public sector at Verizon. And next to Steve, we have Ty Hayes. She's the Chief Technology Officer for the City of Atlanta, right here. And last but not least is Grace Simrall, the Chief of Civic Innovation and Technology for the City of Louisville, Kentucky. So I will ask Steve to kick it off with a brief overview just of 5G, because there's a lot of information out there and what it means and what it entails. And also, before we get started, I have lots of questions, but I think actually the most interesting part of this is to hear y'all's questions. So at the end, I'm going to try to leave enough time to answer or let a few audience questions be asked. We do not have handheld mics, so if you do have a question, if you could kind of wander down towards the front, towards the end, and I'll just make sure I repeat your question so that we can get it answered. Okay, Steve, over to you.
All right, thanks a lot, Kim. So the first question I had as I was asked to come here was, why are we here? Talking about smart cities is interesting. There's lots of cool things going on in the space. Some cities are in different places from their investment cycles than others. But when we look at, how can we help enable cities and municipalities being more efficient, a lot of this starts with the foundational infrastructure that we have to have in place. But we look across really three different main areas of focus. How can we improve sustainability and efficiency with things like smart lighting, traffic management to improve flow and decrease the amount of energy being consumed within the cities? Public safety, how can we improve the experience for our first responders across not just the municipalities, but also how they communicate and how they can do things more effectively with things like augmented reality in their day-to-day jobs. And then certainly, last but not least, is around how can we help improve citizen engagement? And not just engagement, but also the experiences and how they interact with government, how they interact with each other. And then how does this all draw in additional business into the cities and municipalities, which is extremely important. So when we start looking at the types of infrastructure that we need to put in place to handle that, the very first thing we look at is scale. And so when you start talking about 5G, the very first thing that has to be in the ground is fiber. And there's been a couple different panel discussions around the difficulty of permitting and getting those things put in. This is not a quick sprint. This is a long game. We don't expect everything to be done in 6 months. It would be lovely, but the reality is we know this is going to take years, and it's all going to be about where it makes the most sense from an investment perspective. We'll also talk a little bit about densification. There's a lot of misunderstandings around cell phone towers. Folks are used to seeing these large macro cell, big towers with loads of antennas on them. 5G is moving to a small cell type model. And I put a picture on here just to give you an idea of the scale differences that you'll see, to the point where you almost don't see them. They blend into existing poles and existing building sites. So that but we go through the exact same permitting process to site those small radios that we do to put the large macro cell towers in place. So again, that creates some delay in laying out the infrastructure. Again, we build those into our schedules for how and when and where we do the deployment. The other extremely important part is spectrum. Again, that is something that we've worked through with the FCC. To get the kind of density for the types of devices and the types of applications that are going to be driven across 5G, you've got to do it with higher frequencies. It's the only way you can get the kind of bandwidth to drive the kind of low latency and the low power that we expect to need. Does that mean that it is going to be everywhere? It's going to be where we can get the fiber and where we can get the small cell infrastructure put in place. Another piece that's not current, but it's not far away, is something called mobile edge computing. And think of the concept of, for those municipalities who have started putting their services in the clouds, whoever your cloud provider is, now you can start to take some of that cloud infrastructure and pull it closer to the users. And there's certain mission sets, things like augmented reality, autonomous vehicles, where that kind of performance is extremely important, because the last thing you want is an autonomous vehicle waiting for a decision point from a cloud that's 50 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds away. Those milliseconds matter. With the things like mobile edge computing, we're going to get into the sub 10 millisecond type of response. Just by putting the new radio technology out there, we've already gone from a 60 to 80 milliseconds down to around 20. So you're already seeing that a little bit of order of magnitude improvement in the types of performance we would expect to see from the network. And those are real. Those are in the 10 cities that we've deployed so far this year. We have another 20 to go. But we do expect that kind of performance to continue to evolve. But you will start hearing more and more, and I think the previous speakers talked a little bit about mobile edge computing. But for us, it's about what applications make the most sense to put closer to that user set. So those are the four key enablers for smart cities, and I haven't even talked about, that's the starting point. Then on top of this is the ecosystems of software partners who can start driving the kind of innovation you've seen in the last couple generations of, how did Uber start and Lyft, and the transportation changes have just been immense, just by having some of these new capabilities deployed. And I can't even imagine right now all the different applications that you'll be able to take advantage of in the 5G space.
Thanks so much, Steve. And Ty, as the Chief Technology Officer for Atlanta, you're really on the front lines trying to figure out how this technology can be deployed so that it can be really the foundation of all the other aspirations that you have for making Atlanta smarter as soon as possible. Can you talk a little bit about how you see Atlanta handling this transition, which is a pretty big one from 4G to 5G, even though it's happening incrementally? Each one kind of takes a lot of investment, it takes a lot of education, takes a lot of planning, and what that means for adoption.
So, I think that one of the things that's been great for the city of Atlanta is that we hosted the Super Bowl, and there was a lot of investment that was put into the city to support that event, and I think that's really put us forward quite a bit. Just a lot of that investment that was initially made.
And that wasn't just at the stadium, right? That was throughout the city?
That was throughout the city because it was traffic. It was a lot of things that we had to address, security, safety. And so we are now we're looking at all of the investments that were made, and we're strategically looking at how we leverage and we spring forward and take advantage of those investments, and we leverage those investments, and we're strategic about how we move. We're also lucky that a lot of our partners are also making the investments in the area. So we are making sure we form the right strategic partnerships. It is not something that the cities can take on themselves. It is a heavy lift, but I think if we all work together and move in tandem, we can do that. We're also looking at, we don't wait till the 5G infrastructure is built. We're looking at how we're using cellular services now, and we're just kind of building upon that capacity and saying these are use cases for how we continue to build out. I think as we spoke about earlier, also with the transformation to cloud technologies, it's going to also also help us solve some of those harder problems that we're dealing with now with the transformation to the cloud. 5G is going to help us with some of the unique challenges that we have in government that we're trying to figure out. The 5G technology is going to help us with some of that edge computing to solve some of those latency issues that we're dealing with right now.
Thank you. And Grace, a similar question for you. How, in your role, are you handling the telecommunications infrastructure upgrade, and how are you dealing with the interfacing with residents about what this means for them?
Well, I think, first of all, we recognize that this is of strategic importance. So when I talk about both wireline and wireless connectivity, or the lack thereof in our community, I make sure people understand that this is our 21st century public works. Can you imagine a city today that doesn't have electrification? A city today that doesn't have a highway nearby? A city today that didn't have, in the past, a rail line or, again, connected water and sewer? For us, wireline and wireless represents this new level of public works that cities must invest in. And so you have to ask yourself, well, at this point, this actually could be a competitive advantage for cities. And you see that when Chattanooga won the very large grant to upgrade their electrical grid system and was able to, again, leverage that for massive fiber build and become a gig city. There are opportunities there to leap ahead, but at some point, we have to be asking in all communities whether it'll become table stakes, and in fact, will it not be a threat for communities who haven't adopted this. And so, as passionate as I am about discussing it for our urban spaces, and in fact, very directly about the digital divide that we experience and how, in fact, technologies such as 5G can help us bridge those gaps, it is just as important in our rural communities for them not to be left behind.
And it's a great point about the digital divide, and there has been a lot of discussion about 5G and where it's being deployed first. It's being deployed in a lot of larger cities, usually in the more affluent areas, the downtown areas where there are customers able to pay to help with those upgrades, pay for additional service charges, and there are some concerns that the exurbs and areas that are less densely populated and maybe less affluent are not going to have access to this technology anytime soon. And Steve, how is Verizon working to make the deployment equitable to address that issue?
Yeah, I think the first thing we look at is this is not a which city has what. It's where are they in their investment cycles, but more importantly, this is about global competitiveness. It's not about, like I said, which city has what. It's how do we as a country be more competitive, and we call this the fourth industrial revolution with 5G, and as part of that, you do see a migration. I mean, there's a study out there that there are 3 million people per week migrating to cities around the world. That's a natural migration. That's before you have wide deployment of 5G. So you have that natural motion already in place, and this is about how do you enable those centers of innovation or wherever they may be. And it doesn't mean they're all in big cities. It may be at a military base. It may be in a rural area. It's really about where is the investment cycle for those municipalities, and are they ready for that type of challenge? Because one of the things that we always talk about is 5G was really built for business. There is a consumer aspect of this, but this is really about how can we help grow business and increase prosperity in individual cities. And so those are the places we're looking right now, where we've done a lot of partnership in getting those things put in place and getting the infrastructure nailed down. And those just happen to be the natural first starting points for us.
Ty?
I think that you're absolutely right, and we talked a lot about permitting and some of the challenges that come along with that and the time frame, and I think that's where the cities and the municipalities have some of the leverage in those and can really affect some of those things. At the same time, I think it's where we also have an opportunity to be creative about how we structure some of our partnerships to make sure that we have things in place to make sure some of our less fortunate areas are taken care of in those agreements, where we are doing the investments and we're thinking about the growth areas, but we're also making sure that we have language in those agreements to make sure that there's, capital and things that are in place to make sure that our community centers and our parks and recreation and some of our other areas are taken care of as part of those agreements. And so I think it's how you structure those agreements, and I think that's where your public-private partnerships are going to be so important as we move forward.
Grace?
And I think an interesting, relatively recent development as it relates to 5G, although we've seen this with previous technologies, is in fact the same communities that could benefit significantly from having it deployed, again, closing the digital divide, are also the same communities that are questioning whether or not it's safe for them to have this technology. And so it's, again, the responsibility of both business and government to work together to say it is safe. We take, public safety very seriously around, the impact on health of residents who live nearby these devices, and stress that, don't let the fear of the unknown hold you back from being able to participate in again, this new economy that this is going to create.
Yeah, and Kim, just to add to that, just to give you an idea of some of the things that we already see coming. So I talked a little bit about mobile edge computing, just to give you an idea of the order of magnitude. So today on Twitter, you got roughly 270 million users. They generate, I have to look because I wrote it down, I forgot the number. It's about 100 gigabytes of data that's stored per day. One autonomous vehicle is 3,000 times that number. One vehicle. And so when we start talking about innovation, there are catalytic mechanisms behind the technology that are going to drive that kind of change in the infrastructure. And so I want to leave you with that one example. And so people can't even fathom what you have to change in order to make those things happen. And so when I start talking about the infrastructure element, that's why I said that really becomes the easy part. The hard part is really how do you orchestrate all of that together? How do you invest in the right places? How do you make sure you get the right kind of compute and spectrum and fiber and into all the right places, into the right communities?
Security.
And
policy.
security. Yep.
Policy.
Yep.
Privacy.
Right. Well, and to that point, one of the interesting dynamics that we've seen multiple times at panels at this conference already today, is just that between the service providers and the community leaders, we have two different parties that are on opposite sides of the table, opposite sides of these discussions, who are trying to find ways to work together and make negotiations and deals that work for both. And so I'm curious, and this I'm thinking would be helpful for others in the audience who are in your similar positions. Steve, what is there are one or two things that you would love city leaders to understand that maybe you feel like maybe they're a piece or a message that they aren't quite aware of yet or aren't quite getting yet when it comes to rollout of 5G? And on the flip side, for Ty and Grace, what is it that as city leaders who are really in charge of rolling out this really critical technology, what do you wish the service providers who are pitching you and trying to bring their technology to your cities with your budgets, what do you wish they knew about your side of the equation?
Okay, so I guess I'll go first.
Go for it.
No, I think that when we start talking about the speed of change, right now today, a lot of the permitting and the things that are that delay doing any deployments are still working with the same policies and procedures that have been in place for decades. And so what can we do as an industry to help change that? And again, we've had multiple roundtables. It's how do we have those deep conversations about what are the things that make it a fair environment, a protected environment that we can actively pursue, putting the right kind of infrastructure investments in the right places.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you think about, again, the role that government can play, I think we would really hope that companies understand just how important it is for us as public stewards to protect the public rights of way, right? That's oftentimes where the rub is, if you will. And we get it. We get that cities we're all different. We're all our special, unique blend of regulation and challenges around things like historic overlay districts. We get it. But at the same time, that's also what's so special and wonderful about us. And so there are ways for us to work together. Louisville, Kentucky took steps back in 2015 and 16, in fact, to be the first city in the country to pass One Touch Make Ready. It was passed unanimously in a bipartisan effort by our Metro Council. And again, it was one where it just made complete sense. It levels the playing field, it allows people to enter the market, it improves safety, in fact, so you're not blocking traffic to do individual attachment moves on utility poles. It's an example of how cities and companies can work together for something that makes sense for both parties.
Yeah, and I think a big piece of that too, Grace, is it also sets an expectation for everyone, right? So this is the way, this is the roadmap, this is how you get there without having a lot of variability, because that variability is also creates delay and creates pause, and okay, what's the right approach for how do we work with this particular municipality? So
yeah, and I think for us, we talked a little bit about it on the side. I think that as a CTO, we wear a unique hat. I mean, we are there to help drive innovation in city government, and we want to be there to help move and drive change and innovation and transformation. But at the same time, we have a unique customer, which is our end users within the city, but also our residents. And we have to anticipate all the issues, the challenges that come along with any decisions that we make. And so we have to be very concerted and intentional about how we deploy and how we roll out things. And so it's not just as easy just to kind of jump into it. We have to be very intentional about how we implement technology and how we move. And so it's easy when we come together and we pull in the right players in the city or in any municipality and have strategic conversations than to have a lot of sidebar conversations throughout an organization to try to move an agenda forward. You end up kind of tripping over yourselves, right? And so we want to figure out how to, say this is the right thing to do, but let's figure out the right way to get it done here, right? And I think that that's very important for us.
And I think a big piece of that too is what's the right economic model, just like you were talking about earlier, Ty. Not every city and municipality has a huge capital investment fund sitting around waiting to be spent. And so if there's ways that as industry, you talk about the public-private partnership, that we can help balance that load to say, we're used to doing capital investment. It's just, are we doing it in the right places? And I think that can only happen with dialogue, not with legislation, not with some policy behind that. But obviously, an important aspect of that is having that open discussion as often as possible, and it will change. We know it's not the same conversation yet a year ago. Things change, business changes.
And the business changes. So I mean, we're here at fifth generation, but we as cities know that 6G will come, 7G will come. And so as the technology rapidly improves in terms of all sorts of challenges it might face today, how does, again, that interact with the built environment that we are responsible for, again, being good stewards of?
Right. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I just replaced my cell phone, and I get about 16 months out of them. I think that's about the average, so I'm doing pretty good.
Well, speaking about length of time that things last and how quickly things change, what is a reasonable timeline for when we and cities and residents can expect to see kind of meaningful deployment that's not centered around a stadium or a specific downtown or a business district? When will it be more widely dispersed in a reasonable way? Are we talking
I guess that's for me.
Let's start with you, and then how you guys are thinking about your timelines and what kind of promises that you're making to your constituents as well.
No, and again, all of our deployments are really based on where do we have the infrastructure to light the small cells, and we're very thoughtful about getting those into the right neighborhoods where there's existing density that we can take advantage of, so that we've got the ability to roll it out. And Washington D.C. is a good example. We've deployed it. There's 21 neighborhoods, and yes, you had to be in the right place when it was first launched the first week, but I went back the next week and the coverage had improved. And so you're going to see that continuous improvement, and it's really no different than when 4G first got deployed. There was other generations of 4G equipment got deployed. You might have heard of 4G LTE, and start doing underlaying, and new spectrum was added. You're going to see that kind of continuous improvement. But keep in mind, when we start talking about 5G, 4G is not going away. They work together. This is all about extending and adding new capability. And so that it's not like we're shutting something off and turning something else on. It's about where can you get to your 1.6 gigabit of traffic of throughput. And it may be somebody who's really starving to watch movies, or it may be what we hope is we see a lot of the public safety and the transportation and healthcare kind of ecosystem develop around where we've done some of those building and where we intend to continue to grow.
I think that just the fact that we're here today and that this conference is in the city of Atlanta speaks to our commitment to the growth and fast track in this space. We've formed a cross-functional advisory council that's made up of industry leaders, thought leaders in the city that have joined a board to help the city of Atlanta with its strategic growth plans around innovation. The city also has an internal executive board that is strictly focused on smart cities and governance around smart cities and data governance. And so we have a huge commitment in its growth. All of our departments are working on innovation and data quality. So it is a huge focus for the city. We're excited about the space. And then the airport they're pushing. So our customers are demanding the capabilities, and so we are trying to figure out how we balance the speed of needing to get the capabilities in place. We're working with our partners to figure out where they are in their growth plans and where the strategies make sense, and trying to make sure they align. So we want to be first. We want to continue to be first. So that's where we'll be.
Grace?
I think what Ty said that was so interesting is, in fact, managing the expectations at the airport, right? So part of our roles, in fact, is very importantly to manage resident and business expectations. I think, people hear 5G, they assume because it's wireless, it just happens magically, and we don't need to build anything. It just somehow magically it happens. And in fact, so much more fiber backhaul will need to be built to support 5G that people don't even realize. 5G doesn't replace fiber. In fact, it needs even more fiber. And so managing those expectations, making sure people understand what that means in terms of construction within an existing, very disruptive, construction that's happening, retrofitting into an existing city's built environment, is just part of the expectations we have to manage with the public.
And I want to make sure that we use our remaining 5.5 minutes or so to get to audience questions. So if you do have a question, if you could kind of raise your hand and either speak loudly and I'll repeat the question, or I do have an extra mic and I can just come down and meet you. But are there any questions out there for the panelists that they'd like to ask? Oh, come on.
Don't be shy.
Really? Yes.
I was wondering what use cases or projects. I was wondering what use cases, domains from government service delivery aspect you all think will be most impacted by 5G. So which department heads are going to come knocking on your door and ask you for help with whatever it is they need to get done?
You mean which ones are already?
Are already. Exactly.
So we are already working quite a bit in public safety and fire. We're working in water, sensors and so forth. We're also doing a lot of work in traffic already. And then, of course, aviation.
Yeah, those are the usual suspects. I think that an interesting piece of this is the public health aspect. So, government owns a piece of it, but really there's a larger health ecosystem that will benefit from this. So not just EMS, but then the hospitals and the providers, the actual individual professional doctors and physicians who would benefit from having access to information in near real time will be very useful.
Yeah, and I think the other one that we're seeing too is in the education space, because a lot of the technologies we're deploying now are relevant 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, and the next generation of adults coming out of universities or even high schools, they don't remember not having the internet. So their expectation on awareness and access to data and timeliness is completely different than, I'm not going to age myself, but than when I was their age. You know, dial-up was cool when I could get 56K on a bulletin board, and it's significantly changed. So I think we're going to continue to see those expectation changes, not just from department heads, but also from the citizens within the cities, and that will continue to evolve. I asked my 19-year-old, and actually, I'll place a bet. If anybody calls their teenager, will they actually answer the phone? Huh. You can text them, they'll respond to the text. And so that's why it's really becoming more and more of a data-driven environment. And you've got to take those things into consideration as we're building out the infrastructure, and that's the way we're looking at it. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as cities, we can't predict the future. No. We pretend we can sometimes with our 20-year plans, but nonetheless, I like to again go back to this example from history around electrification, right? When electricity was invented and we found a way to be able to harness it, it was, no one's gonna wanna use that. And initially, appliances had to be plugged into light sockets. There were no standard outlets, right? I mean, people had no imagination for what was going to come. I think the exact same thing is gonna happen with increased bandwidth around 5G and again, future developments. So I'm eager to see what the next entrepreneurs are going to invent and how that will benefit government in terms of our delivery of public services.
And I was going to say, in terms of, it also scares me when my customers speak about technology, when they can talk about the technology. I really want them to talk about the problem they want us to solve for them, right? But when you're coming in and you're asking for 5G and you can't really articulate what you want the 5G for, but if you can talk about the problem or the data you're trying to get or what you're trying to do, I think that's the real delivery, when we're able to deliver a product or deliver a solution for you real time in that experience that you're expecting. Because I think even when you start talking about our customers and our residents, we've gotten so used to that real-time data, but I don't think often we really understand what it takes to get that, behind the scenes. And I think that we should have our customers expect that type of result in government the same way you would in private sector. You should expect that same type of delivery.
Thank you. And I think there's a question right over here.
Yes, so smart communities need a smart workforce. So my question is specifically for private sector as well as for the public sector. How do you engage educational sector into your smart development?
That's a great question. Louisville, Kentucky's made significant investments. This is something the mayor has been championing since day one. One of his core values for governing is around lifelong learning. And so we created what was called Cradle to Career and have engaged both K through 12 as well as our post-secondary educational institutes around, again, what our kind of current state need of employers are, but more importantly, what that future of work might look like. And so, in fact, we were recently announced as that Microsoft had selected Louisville as its first regional hub for artificial intelligence. Again, with this understanding that we will work together to figure out what it looks like to work alongside AI, not be replaced by AI.
And the same, we are, again, very intentional about digital inclusion, especially in digital equity with the City of Atlanta, and creating programming where we are using, as we are deploying technology, we are bringing in students from both our high schools and our colleges in the local area to be interns and can participate and get real-time experience. And we also bring in a lot of our workforce from our workforce development and community programming to bring them in as well and create real-time experiences for them on the job. And so we're any of our contracts and things that we're entering in, we're looking for that economic development wrap that we can put around those agreements to make sure we create opportunities, and I think that's where it happens.
Yeah, and just from an industry perspective, I'm going to speak specifically to the discipline of engineering since that's what I am. But first, from a culture perspective, all industry has to have a model of continuous learning, specifically in the engineering and software development space, because that is, I talked about global competitiveness earlier. That's where it's all happening. That's where you're seeing that rapid kind of innovation. You heard of agile frameworks in the software development world? That used to be 6 to 9 months. That's now 3 to 4 weeks. And so you're also seeing that need to have that continuous innovation, and you can't do that without a continuous learning model from a corporate perspective, which we have in place. We can ask the universities, and we have asked the universities with certain programs around things like data analytics. But it's not just about the software coders, it's about psychology majors who understand human behavior and what does abnormal behavior look like? Because, by the way, these ecosystems of 5G, you have to start looking at patterns of traffic and patterns of activity to start recognizing the things that don't belong, and then finding those. And so, it's really a holistic approach to saying, here are the things, the skills we need. We work with a lot of universities to say, here's what we're looking for. And Grace had actually mentioned a program they had started up with Harvard. You may want to touch upon. I think it's a brilliant idea about bringing government and...
Yeah, I mean, we realized that in order for us to be really effective, we have to figure out how to be better partners and how to really collaborate with one another. And so through the Harvard Tech and Entrepreneurship Center, there's been a new executive education certificate developed. It's the Civic Innovation Leadership course. And so I'm one of the instructors of this course. If you want more information, please feel free to reach out to me.